So there was a street gang from Dublin, and we now know them as the Kinahan Trans-Global Organised Crime Gang, or the Irish Mafia, but they started out as a street gang of dealers, and they sort of grew at disproportionate levels at the beginning of the century, when you had a lot of things going on. You had the growth of economies in Europe, you had the openings of the borders in Europe, and you had this massive big cocaine market opening up. So it's a little bit of background. They migrated from Dublin largely to create a headquarters in Spain, and they became millionaires and would go on to become billionaires. But what the Kinahan organisation did was they brought together gangs from different parts of Dublin City. Like any city, there is patches and there would be rivalries. And in Dublin, which is divided by the Liffey, the River Liffey, you would have had a lot of rivalries between the north and the south sides of the city. And the Kinahan organisation, I suppose, offered opportunities for everybody. So you had the coming together of those gangs into one giant cartel. And everything was going swimmingly well on the Costa del Sol until, look, it's always difficult to get the full truth, but it seems to be a mixture of jealousies, rivalries, money not coming back to the right people. And I think by and large, ambition from the Kinahans' next generation to go forth and become even bigger and maybe leave behind some of the old pals from Dublin who didn't feel they had a place at the international table. So all that kind of went on. There was a shooting of a guy called Gary Hutch in Spain in 2015. He was from the Hutch family. They've been described this week as a Hutch organised crime group, an intergenerational grouping. Family grouping, basically, involved in drug dealing and other criminal activities. And he was murdered, and that really was the catalyst for this massive split. And many organizations, large organizations, are kind of like when they start to crumble, it's not really because the police are chipping away at them, it's because they implode. And that's really what happened. There was a divide, and members of the grouping took a side each. So moving on to February of 2016, and the Kinahan organisation, which is been described by the US Treasury as, you know, a drug dealing, weapons smuggling, money laundering, massive big cartel equaling those of the Colombians. They were also involved in professional boxing. As an aside, the leader of the group, Daniel Kinahan, had set up a gym in Marbella, and it was becoming quite a big boxing promotions company. And they were bringing a show to Dublin in February 2016 called Clash of the Clans, in conjunction with Queensberry Promotions, which is run by Frank Warren. And they were having a boxing weigh-in. Tensions were high. Certainly a number of crime journalists and our own team were there that day, not having any interest in the boxing element of it, but basically trying to see who was alongside Kinahan, who was remaining loyal to him, who, you know what I mean, you can pick up a little bit of intelligence from seeing who's actually with somebody else. And we knew that the principals that Kinahan and other significant characters were going to be in Dublin, and it was a photo opportunity. But at the weigh-in, there was a shooting, and a very public one. There was a huge big crowd there for the weigh-in the day before this event was due to take place. It's in a hotel called the Regency in North Dublin. And two individuals went into the weigh-in with handguns and started shooting in the air. As they did, the crowds began to flee, looking for the exits. There was commotion, and a van pulled up outside the hotel, and three men dressed in Garda uniforms and holding Kalashnikovs got out, and they made their way towards the fleeing crowd.
Sorry to cut in. Just for maybe for any Americans, Garda meaning police, and they basically dressed like the Irish equivalent of like a SWAT team, or like, you know, an armed response. Yeah.
Exactly, an armed response. There was confusion actually, because I think the crowds first of all felt relief when they saw the police coming, and then they realized there was something not quite right. They were brandishing these Kalashnikovs, and so AK-47s rather, but they shot one man in the reception of the hotel, and they continued to look for somebody else. Now, what's emerged was they were looking for Daniel Kinahan, the head of the Irish mafia. He had fled and got away, and the man shot dead was a guy called David Byrne, who was one of his senior lieutenants. And it was chaos, and it was absolute, and it was chaos. Okay, firstly, there was the individual that had been killed was a significant character, I suppose, in the organised crime world, but more importantly for Daniel Kinahan, his life and his power had been challenged. Somebody had been, you know, courageous or crazy enough to go for him in such a public way. And what happened in the aftermath was a feud in Dublin that claimed 18 lives, very vicious, violent feud. The police cracked down on that here, and internationally there has been a huge investigation involving police from all over Europe, from Australia, and the DEA involved. And that's been a 7-year operation to dismantle this cartel that started out in the streets of Dublin. It's hard to believe the ambitions that were there, and you know, how lofty they became.
Okay, so very good. Yeah, that was the attack on the Regency. There was subsequent kind of we'll say tit for tat shootings, but mainly occurring on the anti-Kinahan side, the Hutch side. Okay, one thing about the Regency that was of particular I don't know, like straight out of a movie factor, was the fact that one of the two that you mentioned at the beginning was dressed as a woman, another undisguised. Okay, so there already has been a trial involving the Regency, and it was the trial of a young man, certainly accused of being the woman in drag. There's a very famous photo, a pretty good quality photo taken as these two individuals are running away, and I mean, you could certainly speculate that it looks a lot like the individual who went on trial for it. Can you tell us a little bit about that, because that itself, the way that trial kind of came to an end, itself was like dramatic. You know, it was like something from Love Hate, which is an Irish TV show. So being the lady in drag, he was actually a nephew of a very prolific criminal, the leader of the alleged leader of the Hutch family. Yeah, can you tell us a bit about him?
So Patrick Hutch was not only the nephew of Jerry the Monk Hutch, who is seen as the godfather of this crime family as such, or this family-run criminal gang, but he was also the brother of Gary Hutch, the aforementioned person who was murdered in Spain. And you know, Gary Hutch had once been Daniel Kinahan's best friend. Everybody's interconnected. They were all together once, and obviously whatever the tensions grew out in Spain between Gary Hutch and Daniel Kinahan, this just caused catastrophe for the whole lot. But Patrick Hutch was arrested and charged in relation to the murder of David Byrne, and he was put on trial. And the trial was, you know, huge security issue for the state. There was police all over the courts. There was police within the courts. You had the family of David Byrne there. And Byrne, of course, was deeply embedded in the Kinahan organization himself, came from a family that would have been very close and tight with the Kinahans. So even within the court, you had what had spilled out onto the streets and resulted in 18 murders. Mostly the victims were linked to the Hutch side. You had all the characters within the courtroom. And if you've covered any court cases, you can understand that tensions are pretty high on a normal basis. But on this situation, you had literally members of the police, armed members of the police, standing in a line down the middle of the court, and you had the two sides, you know, one on either side of it. So it was pretty tense. Now, the case went ahead and seemed to largely be leaning on the fact that this photograph, which was actually taken by a colleague of mine, it was a Sunday World photograph. Our team had been sent out to the Regency, as I said to you that day, in order to see what we could see. Was there any sign of Daniel Kinahan, who was with him, who wasn't, you know? And they had positioned themselves actually outside the hotel, and they'd heard the shooting, and they had sort of realized that something very dramatic had gone on inside. And the photographer was driving our surveillance Jeep, which is never a great idea. You're better off having someone else driving the surveillance Jeep so the photographer has both hands, right? But he noticed something to his right, a white van, and he just picked up the camera and started clicking, and took 9 images and only one was clear. And that was that iconic picture of the guy in drag and the man called Flatcap, later identified as Kevin Murray, a paramilitary from the north of Ireland, both running with guns in their hands and having come from this murder scene. And of course, in taking the pictures and then looking down at the back of his camera to see which one had become clear, he soon realized that he'd actually got in the way of the getaway van. And the journalist who was sitting beside him had to roar at him. They were very lucky, the two of them. They had the weapons pointed at them, and they had to reverse to basically get out of the way of the van. Everything that's happened around this Regency has been so sensational, really. But that picture, which was later seized under warrant by the Gardaí, was used as part of the evidence in that case. And in the middle of it, the trial, or certainly after it had begun, one of the senior investigators tragically took his own life. And the case was adjourned, and while an investigation into that continued, and all sorts of allegations were being thrown out on social media sites. They've been used by both sides of these criminal enterprises. And while we're not privy to what the results of the internal investigation were, by the time the state came back to the trial of Patrick Hutch, they entered a nolle prosequi, which meant he was able to walk free, and the trial essentially collapsed. Now that Jerry Hutch, his uncle, who had been missing from Ireland and who had €1 million bounty on his head by the Kinahan organization, must have felt very relieved when he saw that. And I think it gave a little bit of confidence to anybody who may have been suspected of involvement, that there would never be another trial again, that was the end of it, that anybody who had been involved felt they'd got away with it. It was a mess. I mean, I can't recall another case where a senior investigator, has died in such circumstances in the middle of a trial. But the investigation, unknowns to us, continued, and we're now in a position where Jerry Hutch, the godfather of the Hutch family, the uncle of Patrick Hutch, is in the dock of the Special Criminal Court, and he is charged with murder in relation to the Regency Hotel. 5 people were charged in the last year, 2 with murder, him and a man called Jonathan Dowdall, and 3 others with charges around it, like facilitating it, as in 2 men are there accused of, providing the vehicles. used in the getaway, and Jonathan Dowdall's father, Patrick, was accused of another sort of a gangland charge to do with facilitating the murder. The trial was due to get underway this week, and now it seems that Jonathan Dowdall has gone state witness. He's entered the witness protection program, and he's going to give evidence against Hutch. So it just never seems to go straight, this story. It's always constantly taking twists and turns. And that's where we're at with it. In the meantime, obviously, the Kinahan organization have been pulverized by the international efforts against them. Last April, the US Treasury and the DEA and the Irish police and the European police came to Dublin to announce that they had levelled sanctions against the Kinahan organization. The first European drugs gang to have that level of financial pressure put on them. And
really, I didn't know they were first.
yeah, they're the first. I mean, if you even look at the sanctions that were issued, you know, in the last year or so, it's largely against the Russian oligarchs. And then our boys are thrown in. But yeah, no, there hasn't been Europol and the DEA and the US Treasury and the other interested parties have never worked like this before. It's been described as a kind of a blueprint for new policing of these trans-global movements. See, your problem is, if you're here in Ireland and you have a drugs gang that are pumping the country with drugs and weapons and laundering funds, but that they aren't living in this territory. I mean, the Kinahan organization, along with the Hutch organization, when they were one, were based in Spain. After the Regency Hotel, the Kinahan organization migrated further to Dubai, to the United Arab Emirates. So you can't just march in there and pick them up. And you can't, it's very difficult to stop the flood of drugs and weapons unless you have international cooperation and trust, really, because that's as important, that you have a situation now where police here in Ireland can pick up the phone and they can call their American counterparts. They are on a first name basis. They probably meet and have drinks when they attend the different countries. They know one another. There's trust there. They can give them intel that has been gathered here in Ireland in the belief and the trust is not going to get into the wrong hands. And that's taken a while. But it's actually been something that has been gifted, I suppose, to the international policing community by the Kinahans. They can be thanked for that.
I remember being very surprised when I saw that DOJ poster with Christy, Daniel, the other son, Christopher Jr. and some of the more senior members. I remember almost like, it's like a thing where like you see like an Irish reference in like a movie. You're kind of like, oh, that's, you know, that's us. Yeah, I was shocked to hear that. Okay, so the second trial involving the Regency, it may be coming up in coming weeks, or you mentioned me possibly adjourned.
Yeah, it opened on Monday, just there a few days ago. I attended it, but prior to its opening that morning, so we have 2 special criminal courts in Ireland. There are 3 judge courts, no juries, and they were originally formulated for to try terrorists, but in recent years, gangland criminals, organized criminals have been put before them for a variety of reasons, but largely because organized criminals tend to intimidate juries, you know, and it's obviously a safer way to. There's criticism about it, of course, but and a lot of the gangland criminals, including Jerry Hutch and Jonathan Dowdall, have attempted to, you know, to claim that the court is not viable, and they have tried to have their trials moved before a jury, where they probably would have had a better chance, really. Bearing in mind, Jerry Hutch is actually quite a popular character in Dublin, albeit he's heading up a crime gang. But so there's two special criminal courts. So the first one, Monday morning, Jonathan Dowdall and his father, Patrick Dowdall, were produced in front of it. They had last week, in a big U-turn, pleaded guilty to lesser charges of facilitating. Certainly Jonathan Dowdall, who was facing a murder charge with a mandatory life sentence if found guilty, pleaded guilty to a charge that involved renting a room in the Regency Hotel on that day. It will carry a far lesser sentence, far less serious charge. So when that happened, we realised some sort of a plea deal had gone on in the background between the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Dowdalls. Rumours started really that Dowdall was going to give evidence, but very difficult to actually clear it up until Monday morning. He's wheeled into court with his father, looking wrecked, through the jury box and surrounded with cops. And just even that image of them coming through the doors, very clear that the rumours were right and Dowdall was gone state witness. So it was his sentence hearing on this lesser charge, and a sentence hearing will hear details of the crime. Sometimes there'll be a victim impact statement. You'll hear details of what the individual who's pleaded guilty has agreed that he did. So we were given a detailed run through of the Regency Hotel, what happened that day, where everybody was, what was caught on CCTV, and they went through this renting of a room at the hotel by the Dowdalls, by Patrick Dowdall. The father had booked the room, used his credit card to hold it, gone to the hotel, paid for it in cash, had gone up, got 2 key cards for the hotel. We were told that the 2 Dowdalls then went to meet an individual to give them the key cards for the room. That individual, I surmised, was Jerry Hutch himself. We were told that, or at least the court was told, that Jonathan Dowdall didn't know what was happening, that he often purchased items for the unnamed members of the Hutch family on credit cards, that this was quite a normal thing for him to do. We were told that the Dowdalls were actually neighbours of Jerry Hutch, next door neighbours. I mean, to me, with all that has happened in Dublin and, you know, so many of that community around the North Inner City, which once would have been so loyal to Jerry Hutch, a lot of them were bought over by Kinahan money over the last few years to work as spotters, to give information on them. For me, the idea that the next door neighbour has now gone state witness is the final betrayal. Like, it's quite ironic, really. But yes, they were neighbours, and Jonathan Dowdall's mother was very friendly with Jerry Hutch's wife, we were told. Jonathan Dowdall's mother was a street trader. She sold clothes from the back of a pram up on Moore Street, and the Hutch kids would sometimes give her a hand or help her out. The families were so close that when Gary Hutch died in Spain and his father Patsy went out to identify his body, that Dowdall went with him. Now, it wasn't detailed which one. I imagined it was the father because he's more his age group, but maybe it was Jonathan. So we were also told, or at least the court was told, that Jonathan Dowdall was a guy who in 2007 had set up his own electrics company, that he was hugely successful, and he employed 20 local people. He was very good at giving employment to kids from the North Inner City and giving them apprenticeships. That at the same time his business was so successful, his mother's clothing industry from the pram seemed to have gone pear-shaped, and she was borrowing a lot of money from the Hutches. Bit of woolly evidence, I would have thought, given, or certainly suggested to the court, that Dowdall's mother owed money to the Hutches. They wouldn't take it back, but the Dowdalls were basically buying holidays for them on credit cards, and they'd buy them tickets, and all sounded a bit strange, but nonetheless, that's what the court was told. And and that Jonathan Dowdall just went from strength to strength. His business was so successful. He privately educated all his children. He bought a beautiful house in Dublin. You know, he just was this local boy done good, and that he had essentially been used by Jerry Hutch, that he had no idea of what was going to happen in the Regency. That day, he thought he was just renting, or his father thought he was just renting a room for him. And yet, the court was also told that in March, early March, Jonathan Dowdall travelled with an individual who I know to be Jerry Hutch to the north of Ireland in a car. And that car was being bugged at the time. And that evidence, those conversations in that car, are expected to be part of the Regency trial. I understand that a lot of the conversation surrounded trying to get the weapons used back up to the north. So I suppose his own senior counsel, Michael O'Higgins, has been trying to paint Jonathan Dowdall as an innocent party in the crime of the Regency. He's pleaded guilty to been involved in renting the room, which was used by one of the gunmen. But he's claiming no knowledge at all of the criminal enterprise around it. It's a bit of a strange one because he's going state witness. And yet, and a lot of the time in the courts and historically, you see that for those in witness protection, for the state witnesses, the judiciary do not like witnesses who have a lot to gain, who may be giving evidence because they have something to gain. And what's indisputable is that Dowdall was facing a murder charge, and that's been dropped. He also has serious convictions himself. A year before the Regency Hotel, he and his father, it's quite a peculiar story, but there's a thing called DOWDALL, or one of these websites where you can buy secondhand gear.
I guess kind of a bit like Craigslist here, for the American.
You can buy whatever you want, just a pair of secondhand curtains, whatever. Anyway, Jonathan Dowdall was selling a motorbike, and this guy got in touch, and they were toing and froing about selling the motorbike. And for some reason, Dowdall invited this guy for dinner in his house, and this guy went for dinner in his house. Now, I've never been in a situation like that, either buying or selling secondhand goods, but this is what happened. And when the guy got to the house, Dowdall and his father brought him out to a garage, tied him up, waterboarded him, told him they were senior figures in the IRA and that he was going to have to spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. They threatened to kill him, threatened to chop off his fingers. When this came to court, so this was in 2015, this happened, and they videoed it. And the only reason it ever came to light was because when Dowdall's home was raided after the Regency, after he had obviously been connected to it, they found a USB. And when they were going through it, they found the video of this punter being tortured in the garage. And they found the victim, and the victim came along and gave evidence. And in 2017, a year after the Regency, both Dowdall and his father were jailed in relation to this kidnap and assault. The father got 8 years, dropped to 6 on appeal, and I think Dowdall got 12, which was dropped to 10. So they've been in custody since then, really. They've been released on bail only in recent ones since those sentences were completed. But that's a very serious and significant criminal conviction to have going forward as a state witness. Dowdall also, when his home was raided after the Regency, and that was publicised, went on a talk show here in Ireland, the Joe Duffy Liveline show, popular afternoon radio show. And he basically told the host there was nothing to see here. He wasn't involved in anything. He didn't do anything. He had no, well, he might have known the Hutches. He didn't really know them. He kind of knew them. He didn't, you know. So all of that together is going to be some healthy fodder for the defense for Jerry Hutch to try and pick apart this state witness. And there's a lot of conversation on here now at the moment about what is this witness protection. You know, part of the evidence during the sentence hearing, you know, apart from the details of the Regency, apart from Jonathan Dowdall's involvement in what he did, was the fact that he was going into the witness protection program. And this was to sort of paint a picture that, okay, he's looking for, he doesn't want to go back to prison, this guy, Dowdall, because number of reasons, but by and large, it's very difficult. It's going to be very difficult for the state to protect him and then members of his family outside the prison on the witness protection as he comes to give evidence. So his defense, his lawyers are basically looking for him to get a suspended sentence in relation to what he's admitted to doing for the Regency. He wants to be left out with the family in this witness protection, so as he'll come and give evidence at Jerry Hutch's trial. It's all a bit of a mess, to be honest with you. And, you know, there's a lot of debate about what witness protection is, what Dowdall will get from it. And I suppose his legal team are painting a picture that it's not like he's getting off. It's not like, okay, he's not going to face charges now for murder, but he's a life sentence on this program. He's going to be looking over his shoulder for the rest of his days. He's giving evidence. They're pretty much claiming because he believes it's the right thing to do. And, you know, in taking this course of action, his life as he knows it and the life of his family as they know it is now over as such.